40% of footballers go bankrupt 5 years after retirement to keeping up the lifestyle they once had. 500 former Premier League players lost £1 billion from The Guardian after retirement from sketchy investments.
But you'd work with an advisor and that kind of thing would be avoided. You don't know when is the final whistle until probably a few months after your last contract. Those that haven't gone through advice, it's like building a house with no sketches, is ultimately going to go wrong.
Why do athletes or professional athletes need advice so badly?
Got a lot of people that will try and influence you for the right and wrong reasons. You've not got very much certainty. You've only really got the contract that you've got in front of you. You might not have any aspirations to have a family now or buy a home, but at some point you probably will. So how can we get into good habits? What are the kind of things that we could be looking at? Over time, building that picture of what motivates people, and me understanding that really helped shape what good advice looks like. And it isn't just money. It's your life at the end of the day. Money's just a tool to help you live your best life.
What would you say to yourself if you could look back in the mirror and you could point to yourself 5 years before your career or your journey?
I think you can get wrapped up in business for the wrong reasons. And if I could go back at the very beginning and remind myself, it's
Welcome back to the Zomi WealthCast, where we explore the ideas shaping the future of financial planning and money. I'm your host Jordan, and today's guest brings fresh energy into how advice can support people in high pressure and high performance worlds. Emmelia Powell is an independent financial advisor who's been featured in the Financial Times and is rapidly building a reputation for work with athletes and entrepreneurs. As co-director of Premium Wealth Solutions and Sports, she understands unique challenges faced by clients whose career and money don't always follow traditional paths. Emmelia's mission is to combine technical advice with empathy, helping clients not just manage their money, but also the expectations and pressures that come with success. From sudden wealth to life after sport, we'll unpack what athletes need tailored advice, how empathy shapes Emmelia's works, and the lessons she's learned along the journey. Hello, Emmelia. How are you doing?
morning. Thank you for having me.
Oh, good. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm really excited about this conversation. I've got a few points that I want to speak about. And ultimately, with my background being in professional sport and you work in professional athletes, something I probably should have gone to in the very beginning of my career.
That's a compliment. Thank you.
So obviously you don't just start out as a financial advisor, and there's a lot of history with your family and your mum and so on. What was Emmelia's journey like, where she wasn't a financial advisor 5 years ago and you had no incline to go into that career? Where did you start? How was school? How did you go to university? What did you study? And then what gave you that decision to go into the mysterious world of financial advising?
So I have an appreciation of sport from a young child, was obsessed with horse riding. I started when I was 4 and I packed up my boots when I was 21 when I had my first child.
Goodbye to the horse riding.
Yeah, it was too much to do children and horses and husband. It was just like crazy. But sport had implicitly taught me quite a lot through that journey. It taught me to be resilient, to be hardworking, to be accountable for an animal and turn up every day through wind, rain, storms. So I had an appreciation of sport, but never had a longing necessarily to follow a professional career myself. And I met Nick at school. He was playing for what I thought was a Sunday league football team in Crewe. He always played down his trajectory. I didn't understand football, so I didn't really know where that was going to go. And we've been together since, I don't even know the years anymore, but since we were 15, 16.
Wow.
So accidentally then entered into being the wife of a professional athlete and following his journey, which breeds a very, very different chapter of your 20s, because you have different restrictions to life, but equally different opportunities, because you don't have the financial pressures necessarily that people in their 20s do. So that leads to having children younger, getting married younger, maybe moving around, going on nice holidays. So all in this time, I'd accidentally fallen into being the supporter of a sports player. He was receiving advice from my mum, which completely changed our trajectory. I'm sure we'll get into that. And I was going to go do journalism at university.
I was going to touch there. So obviously, meeting Nick really young as well and seeing his trajectory in the football world, and also quite suddenly as well. So you said you wanted to do journalism. Did you take on to that? Did you go into university?
No, so he was earning money because he went onto a professional contract. So we would go to Nando's and, we were really, really
Still
cute.
go to Nando's?
Yeah. We have very sort of low expectations. That was our treat night. We'd go for a date, or Frankie and Benny's, if that's still around now. That was like a treat for us. And I saw what money allowed him to do and the freedom that it gave him. And I quickly realised that if I went and I was a student, not only would it change the dynamic of our relationship, but I also wouldn't have that freedom and flexibility that I saw he had and looked quite nice. So my heart wasn't in journalism. For some reason, I wasn't. And I went and got an apprenticeship and worked for a bank.
Right, wow, okay.
So, yeah.
Do you think, obviously, handling that relationship and obviously his high performance role and what he did, there's a lot to it. Obviously, you said, luckily, to some degree, there's no financial pressure, but there's probably definitely an emotional support pressure element of that with the career, which we'll go into. Just touching on, the apprenticeship, the banking. So, obviously, Mum Jackie, is that correct?
Yes.
She's obviously in the background, the financial advisory element. So going to banking, what then led you out the apprenticeship, going, oh, well, Mum, I'm going to work alongside you and go into the financial advisory world?
So apprenticeships were something quite new when I was applying. They'd been around, but university was definitely the preferred further education route. So I went a little bit against the grain, but I wanted the independence, as we touched on. And I remember going from earning £40 a week, part-time work, I was brushing horse stables, to then picking up my first paycheck of £1,000 a month. I thought, I'm never going to be able to spend this. I mean, I wish I thought that now when I was paid, I'll never be able to spend all of this. But yeah, it felt like money had rained on me, and I now had an element of independence and control and freedom. So that it wasn't necessarily that banking that drew me into it. Maybe it was influenced because my mum was in the finance sector. They just had a good, well-paid apprenticeship pathway local to me. And I was probably just a bit lazy and just thought, yeah, I'll go for that. I'll do that and see where it gets me. And that was my early introduction into corporate world and working and earning money.
What made you pivot to start obviously working alongside Mum with Premier Wealth Solutions? What was that decision?
So I had been working at the bank for probably 3 or 4 years, had my first child, had a lovely year off maternity leave, went back pregnant, had a lovely year off maternity leave, and then fell pregnant again. And nobody ever said or made me feel uncomfortable about this. But I think as a woman, you do battle with an element of guilt. I'm going back pregnant. I mean, I'd happily sub Nick in. You can have the pregnancy. I don't actually want to do this. But, and I think I reflected on where we were as a family at that point. We would have 3 kids in 3.5 years. I had fed them all. He was traveling a lot. All our parents were still working because we were so young having children.
Full house.
We don't have retired grandparents. So I needed something that gave me a bit more flexibility. And it all just aligned at once. My mum was then at a cliff edge in her professional career, contemplating setting up by herself. And I just said, do you want me to help? I could probably do a few nap times a week.
Among the whole family dynamics and the kids and the professional husband.
Honestly, I came in not even knowing how to navigate Outlook, 6 years ago.
So obviously, you're mentioning about, working with Outlook and not knowing how to get around it. How is the dynamics? Obviously, you know, it's very different having a mom and daughter relationship, but then now you're work colleagues at the same time. And alongside Nick as well, who's involved as a relationship management
Yeah.
aspect. Because work is one thing and relationships at work is a different thing. So how is that managed within the family household?
Growing up, me and my mum were fire and fire. We're both very similar personalities. So I went in and was assuming there might be conflict, and I couldn't be further wrong. We read each other's minds. We are motivated for the same reasons. We wholeheartedly back each other's success because it's the success collaboratively we both benefit from. I don't think I could find a more aligned business partner than those directly in my family.
Wow.
And I've seen other people, other business owners that we help, that are clients. I've seen working with family work really, really well for them too. There's obviously instances where it does create problems, but for me, she has given me everything. I wouldn't be where I am today without her. So I'm eternally grateful, even though she does wind me up
Shout out to
sometimes.
Jackie.
Yeah, shout out, Mum.
That's brilliant. No, that's great. You know, obviously, hats off to you. I think, also, I guess I'm not a mother, but I can't imagine having 3 kids. A husband works at, you know, one of the peak performance sports, you know, full-time professional, and then obviously works as a mom, and then also going and adventuring, doing your exams and all of that. I can't imagine the sacrifice it must have taken as well on a time allocation point of view, which is crazy. But obviously, you know, you're so fixated on doing the right thing and building this, you know, the part of your life with the kids, with Nick, with mum, and Premier Solutions. Before we go into really a lot of questions about athletes and entrepreneurs, I just want to understand, how do you balance this? What's obviously your interest outside of sport, and work and being a mum and so on? How do you get away from this? And even if you do get away from it, what do you do? What's your interest outside of the industry itself?
That's a really interesting question. I couldn't do what I do without my mum, without Nick, even though he has his own career. I am so excited to build forward in the future with him and to work together, because the entirety of our lives has been led by football and dictated to by a schedule that we don't really have any control over. You know, Christmas days have been missed.
Boxing days.
Yeah, middle child's birth was missed. It's not very forgiving, especially as a family. So I am excited to build with him in that next chapter. And I couldn't do what I do now without those people around. Nick's parents, my sister, my friends, Nick, the girls. They are so aware that Mummy and Daddy both have jobs and we do have to work and things. What do I do other than work? I run children up and down the motorway to their own...
Which is the sport itself.
Yeah, to their own respective sports now. So that's like another wave of sports, and how I've got this vested interest in the outcome of a women's game or women's gymnastics. Your daughter's
playing footy for women's side, the Man United, the little juniors.
So she's on her own path, and I think men's football is complicated. Grassroots football, academy football is a whole other kettle of fish, like, because it's children and parents are so protective and defensive of children, and
a lot of egos running around, and
it can get really muddled at times. But so she loves it, and she loves having these moments with Nick, still playing. She idolizes him. She thinks he's better than Messi. I haven't got the heart to tell her, but she wants to say that, then that's fine. And then I've got one that's super bendy, doing gymnastics and things like that. So that gives me the greatest deal of joy between work and helping people. And I genuinely love what I do, wholeheartedly. And I do love the motorway. Is that like sad that I'll get home tomorrow and I'll think, oh, we're going to training tonight. Like, I get my big coat, go and watch her, and I just watch her for that 2 hours of training to the competitions. I live through my children. And my friendship groups that have children, we all come together.
That's the gang, basically.
Yeah, with a good coffee in the morning on a Saturday, stood with no fingertips left at the end of 10 o'clock.
All the coffees from those automatic machines.
Yeah, they're just dripping out. And that's my life, and that brings me so much contentment. I genuinely am happy with 4 beds made in the morning, a wash on, a Sunday roast, and a weekend that's been full following the kids around. It brings me so much pleasure.
You know, I guess we'll start touching into the financial advisor point of things, but there's a good saying, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life, which is obviously when you get to that point and you do realize what you actually love doing, it's a good motto to live by.
I think from taking it slightly deeper, I have a great deal of gratitude that I totally resonate with that point, that work gives me that level of satisfaction and home life has this kind of harmony. And I think it does come back to gratitude of what have you got around you. And we'll touch on this with money, but there is always a comparison. Comparison is the thief of joy. It steals so much from us. And sometimes where we can just reflect and sit back and look at what we've got, there's quite a lot of happiness in just...
We're touching on part already, and the part I want to go is really your aspect to giving advice, and I guess Emmelia's philosophy on empathy and understanding. Because one thing, obviously, you're dealing with, clients that are super competitive to a degree. Obviously team sports, whether it's rugby or football or whatever it might be, there is a lot of individualists. It is very individual because you're obviously competing against someone in the same position or someone in a different team or someone in a different academy and so on. How do you say, have you built the advice kind of package you give to your clients? Not necessarily the advice, but the way your brain and mind thinks on your philosophy of advice. Could you give a bit about that?
I think it all starts with conversation and space for conversation. So if I can understand the person, and I do not profess to be any kind of psychologist, I don't think it needs that level of expertise. It just needs the allowance of genuinely what things worry you. And you would be surprised what would worry you about the outcome of your life would be different to mine. And for that reason, there's a story that sits behind that shapes why your perspective on that outcome is. And I like digging deeper into that, and not in a way that's intrusive, but over time building that picture of what motivates people. Some people don't like paying a lot of fees, for example, or some people like the number on a return, but there is a reason behind that, and often an insecurity. And me understanding that helps my advice, and I only get there by genuinely listening and digging and saying that's really interesting. Where did that come from? What was that trigger point? Why did that change at that point for you? And how did that feel? And at first, when I approached conversations where I was asking those leading questions, I thought, is this my position? How are people going to push back? Are they going to...
Basically opening up immediately, something you've never,
And I am not joking. It's like popping a spot. When I ask people, they turn around to me after and I'll say, I'm really sorry if that did pry, obviously everything's confidential, but that really helped shape what good advice looks like. And it isn't just money. It's your life at the end of the day. Money's just a tool to help you live your best life. And they'll say, that was the first time I felt like I've been heard. Thank you. It was good to get it off my chest. I enjoyed that. And then every time they are just pouring into that cup. Once it's done and they've started to reveal bits, they'll say, oh, last time we spoke, I said about this. Well, this happened now. You're just building that context, that relationship. And it does change the advice you give.
I think a good behavioral part is called emotional intelligence. I think is really important to have, right? To really read the room and kind of pry on what's, I guess, the motivations behind certain rationale and reasons. And the beauty of it is with money is sometimes it's something we probably, we wouldn't say neglect, but we've got an ego point of view where we won't maybe come and confront it, and having those difficult but uneasy conversations, which are well worth it, helps a lot because it digs out like those things you kind of hide. Talking about entrepreneurs and athletes, most likely footballers, I'd assume, and entrepreneurs, or just people in running businesses, is it quite difficult sometimes to be the facilitator of difficult conversations, whether that's injuries or retirement, or massive career falls or so on? How do you go about those conversations? And you have to be confident, and willingly to support that conversation. So how do you go about that?
I think the point is knowing that everybody will reach a cliff edge, and that will look very different, and the circumstances will be very different on an extreme for some people, or slightly more forgiving in other ways. But foresight of being with Nick in a professional capacity and now building a business, I'm not naive enough in my own personal life to think stuff isn't going to crop up and it's going to be hard and it's going to steal away some of the light at that moment. So navigating them is setting the expectation from day one that there is so much in football that changes all the time, so much, and so much in business. And the two are very alike in the sense that you can only mitigate and manage certain risks. And to me, financial security is one that you can manage and mitigate to a degree. Having that comfortability and having those conversations, when those things crop up, which they will, something will happen. You won't see it coming.
Inevitable.
Yeah. And it's going to derail you for a little bit. When it does come, finances are not one of the things you're worrying about. We can remove an element of that from your life. And just following through football, following through businesses, and I've seen businesses and money and politics of that really, really change what the outcome was when we first started talking. And football, the manager, the club, your body, your mental health, family dynamics, wider circles, you can't influence a lot of those at the time either. So it's not a difficult conversation if you can set an expectation that don't worry too much. This is how we're going to create the level of stability that we can. This may or may not be perfect, but it's going to make it more comfortable than where you were before, kind of flying blind and just going into the darkness. And we spoke about books that we liked. I think in Morgan Housel's most recent book, he said that as humans, we like certainty and we like clarity and we like definites. And working within those parameters makes us all feel happy. If I can give somebody some element of certainty and clarity in finances, it makes those difficult conversations just that bit easier.
Well, I think, it's to do with really, I'm stereotyping now for really everyone in civilization, but I feel finances create the routine. So if you're limited to what your financial issues are or the financial pot that you have, you can only do so many things, right? And then a lot of people end up living paycheck to paycheck because of the routine of their lifestyle. And obviously, being able to have a really good grasp of that routine makes your life so much more willingly to do more things because you understand the cons, the pros and the negatives. Going on to that and being the facilitator, obviously, of difficult conversations, obviously not easy because one, you are trying to provide emotional support and human connection, but then as well, you're balancing the technical advice element as well. How do you manage that with clients? So obviously you want to come across talking about numbers and figures and stuff because you also need to understand the client, but at the same time, your role is being a financial advisor to get the best solutions or puzzles. So in your conversations with a lot of individuals, do you touch on those numbers and those elements and you understand those structures, or do you first get to understand the client and then build on those structures?
Yeah, the starting point for me is always the client. And the client and their aspirations of life, and numbers are a part of that, but it's not in terms of what are the returns, what element of tactical none of that. It's you and what's life like right now for you. And then through those difficult conversations, I think there would need to be a segregation of that.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be a conversation where I can be a facilitator and listen and understand and really hear you say some of the challenges that are in your life. It could be very different. If it was divorce, then fine. If it was a business exit that was really particularly challenging, and challenging not from a financial perspective, but the stress and strain it was perhaps putting on the business owners, in its entirety, I need to understand those problems and be there for you for that. And then I can reflect on that and see what implications it has on your cash flow, on your financial plan, on your investment. Do we need to change the liquidity? Do we need to move things around so that you feel like you have a bit more freedom with your money again and everything? Yeah. And I would say in those two separate ways, and a moment for me to be able to reflect and think, what is the best advice now? I wouldn't jumble it all up in one chat.
You touched on a good point, I think, as well, is there has to be rationale behind the advice, and that's the outcome, isn't it? So in order to really understand the best benefit of outcome, you need to understand why they're making the certain decisions they want and build the advice around that. But I think as well, being an advisor in the profession, we also need to learn to challenge clients, because sometimes, we aren't just, the yes sayers and just do what the client says. You need to challenge them too. And sometimes it's difficult having those conversations because you really need them to understand that you've got the best interests for them. And this goes into the conversation really with, why do athletes or professional athletes need advice so badly? We spoke about different conversations, but really, if you think of the arc of a lifespan of a professional athlete, footballers, rugby players, and so on, it's really just 10 years, if you're lucky, 15 years. The highs and the lows, instant good money in the beginning, and then, you got brilliant contracts, might be in the limelight, like the spotlight, sorry. Be on TV, then 5 years later a new youngster comes through and he's next one in your position, and the contracts get less and less and less, and so there's a pot of value. Obviously living in first hand, with obviously Nick being a professional athlete, you've seen those lows and the highs, and hopefully there aren't too many lows but good highs and so on. You've seen that firsthand. So as someone who's working with clients every day like that, and if there's any athletes listening to this conversation, why do you think it's really important they reach out to someone and start those initial conversations?
Yeah, it's going back to, it's not going to be a linear ride. No professional career is, but sports, growing a business, and if there's sort of rapid growth, everything is very condensed. So not only do you suddenly have a lot of money, and with that, quite a few questions to answer, and you feel like you've got a lot of responsibility, you've also got a lot of people that will try and influence you for the right and wrong reasons. And you've not got very much certainty. You've only really got the contract that you've got in front of you. Now, there's probably a lot of self-belief in athletes, because that's what drives them and makes them
unwillingly.
And I applaud that. But I can kind of speak from experience now that what ends up happening is an athlete will get a paycheck, and I would ordinarily want to sit with them, with their parents ideally, or a trusted member of the family or wider circle.
Power of attorney, as I say.
Yeah, not quite that at that point, but sit with them, with somebody that they feel comfortable with, and we have conversations way before the money comes in, so that there's a relationship there. And if I'm being really blunt, so you don't learn to spend that paycheck, because unlearning to spend that paycheck is much harder than learning to save it. And nobody ever complains that they saved too much. And it's about talking them through that. So you've only got the security for this contract. You might not have any aspirations to have a family now or buy a home, but at some point you probably will. So how can we get into good habits? What are the kind of things that we could be looking at? And yeah, just guiding them through what good finances look like. It's almost like a time capsule. So from the first contract to the end of the first contract, we've earned good money. And all of a sudden, our life, our expectation of what normal looks like is we've got a nice car, an A1, a G-Wagon. We've got a girlfriend that we like going on holiday with, or a boyfriend that we like traveling with. Holidays went from 2,000 to 15,000 a year. The family are coming. We've got children on the way.
First class flights, nice house, nice villa.
And what you have done is learn to burn your money before you've built any stability. And like, that is a dangerous game, because once your income stops, you have a long time of life left ahead of you.
You mentioned, sorry to interrupt, you mentioned in the very beginning about comparison. I think that's massive in that professional, I guess.
But we're so
athlete's
easily
life.
influenced. Like me and Nick were, 17, 18, 19. Like I said, when I first got my £1,000 a month, and I was, money's raining. Like I'm doing well. I feel, happy. I've got a bit of power. You think people start to expect certain ways of life from you. It is hard. It really is hard, which is why having Nick in the business to sit with players to talk them through and say, it's so fickle. Don't get too wrapped up in it. Honestly, wealth is so silent, and so is comfortability. Don't worry about living in the fast lane. And some people will resonate with that and some people won't, and that's fine. But
I think it's a good, read somewhere, and someone always said is, when you get a salary, pay yourself first. And what obviously means is put a bit of money away from your paycheck into your savings. But it's a good analogy already to live by, because no one ever really pays themselves first, do they? They usually go spend it on something else or someone else. Obviously, working with all the professional athletes, is there comparison likeness of entrepreneurs and professional athletes on the risk taking and the adrenaline and the ego and the confidence? Is there something you see along those two lines or similarities?
that's a really interesting point. So I would generally say that there is slightly more worldly knowledge from a business perspective, because they generally have gone through a bit more of a mainstream pathway, and it's been a steadier progression to starting a business. Often you're kind of mid-20s, 30s. You've had that decade of wasting your first paycheck that was insignificant, and you've not insured something and got away with it, but it's very different for football. And I think through that growth journey that's been a bit steadier, they have an appreciation of what risk is. And I think that's a very important conversation that I have with clients. Let's define risk, because there is risk everywhere. Cash is not risk-free, neither is investing, neither is owning property, neither is earning an income like this. So which risk do we need to manage for your lifestyle? And that's quite an important differentiator. But just talking about investments in themselves, I would say business owners generally have more of an appreciation of businesses, investing in them, the returns that you can get from. So they're not as scared to hold more businesses' equities in their portfolios. Whereas footballers, I think from what I have seen with clients, through Nick, what he felt like, he just wanted to keep it in his bank or to buy property with it, because it's
the right thing to do at the time.
It felt safe. And there is a fear of just losing it all in football. And that is a headline that's just tarnished everywhere for different reasons. So that there needs to be a lot of education. I spend quite a lot of time with football clients to appreciate different types of risks.
It's really good that you put on that part, because obviously you're going to work with young athletes coming through who's going to get that big paycheck, and I'm sure you also work with athletes that are now towards the end of their careers. And I think it's the PFA, which is the Players Football Association, says 52% of former players have financial difficulties. It's a spread over various articles. There's another one over various free articles as well, is that 40% of footballers go bankrupt 5 years after retirement to keeping up the lifestyle they once had. There's another one as well that says 500 former Premier League players lost £1 billion from The Guardian after their retirement from sketchy investments. So this plays into how do you handle those conversations when former athletes go into retirement, and kind of it's a self-worth thing, because they were earning super loads of money. There was a massive cash flow coming in. Now all of a sudden that cash flow is dried up. Yes, they might have a lot of money in the bank account. They might spend it all. But how do you sustain those conversations?
Shameless, but you'd work with an advisor and that kind of thing would be avoided, because you would have had 8 years, 10 years, maybe less, but you would have had that time to plan for that day, because we would know that was going to happen. And And especially with footballers on the approach to retirement, it is about liquidity. You don't know when is the final whistle until probably a few months after your last contract, because you're still floating around maybe, unless it was injury and you choose that you're done. Some players kind of slip away from the game. So it's not like they definitely know that they're retired until a few months later. But as you're approaching that over the hill 30, it is about maybe changing things, having more liquidity, having a bit more cash, thinking about what realistically can we generate for you in income from the different assets that you've built through our relationship. Those that haven't gone through advice, it's like building a house with no sketches. It is ultimately going to go wrong, because there is so much to my job that I could sit in front of a client and look at something, understanding them, and say, that'll need to do that. Yeah, that'll be more tax efficient to do it that way. And it's all of that built-in knowledge of where the tax rules are now. Could change in a month, couldn't they?
Yeah, it could. Yeah, I mean, November's budget's coming off, so.
But it's all of those. It's such a moving piece, and to do that in isolation with no sort of prior financial knowledge, not only of just finances, but equally where legislation and regulation are now, that's a mean feat. So, yeah, those stats don't alarm me. If you haven't made a plan, if you haven't done planning before you get to retirement, it's going to be a harder one to navigate. What can I actually spend, and am I going to run out of money?
You know, and touching on that point, you know, let's say, for example, there's professional athletes who, or even entrepreneurs who haven't had that advice, you know, obviously shameless, but, you know, I think it's a big identity shift, isn't it? From, you know, living that spotlight to going to retirement. Have you had those difficult conversations with athletes before, where, you know, they actually, oh, you're going to be okay, just you need to understand there's a process to it, and planning now then planning later is the best thing for that?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably something that you will have resonated with having an athletic background. I resonate with when I went into motherhood and totally lost my identity of what I was before. I just kind of became this mum to 3 kids that hung off me. Again, that is 2 very different journeys. So there is a financial plan that we have been working towards, and you are likely going to retire within the next 2 to 5 years. And we're ready. Financially, we're ready. But the emotional one of losing that identity mid-30s, mid-20s.
So it is a bubble at the end of the day.
And that is going to be hard for anyone. It's exactly the same for a business owner that sells. You no longer have routine, have that purpose, and in sport have that like global recognition on some scales. That is really hard. And I would recognize that in a player, that the emotional turmoil here is going to bounce more than what the finances will behave. It's been planned. We know what it'll do. But yeah, I think that's potentially where a more empathetic planner, one that is really invested in those emotions and that outcome mentally for a player.
It's just re-educating, isn't it? Just massive on the re-educating element. You know, I want to get to really the closing matters, obviously, and you know, you've had a journey yourself with Nick, and being a financial advisor, being a mother, and understanding, you know, Nick as his own person, or obviously seeing the turmoil and the time frames from an outsider's perspective, but also on an insider's perspective, because obviously Nick being your husband, so you've seen it firsthand and from an overview. I'm sure you've seen articles and you've seen everything, and even with other footballers and professional athletes. If you had to restart your career from the very beginning, obviously you've been a financial advisor for nearly 5 years. You spend countless hours in the evenings trying to do your studies and getting through the exams and learning. What would you say to yourself if you could look back in the mirror and you could point to yourself 5 years before your career or your journey? What would you want to tell yourself?
I think you can get wrapped up in business for the wrong reasons, and I really resonate with founders. I was listening to Grace Beverley's podcast the other day with Sophie T, who's an artist, and she recognized that at one point in her own personal growth and journey that she was comparing to metrics or driving forward a business that was driven just by sales and revenue. And I recognize that there has to be a commerciality to every business. But going back to my first point, I love what I do. I want to help people that want the help and build a business where I'm working with clients and making a difference. And if I could go back at the very beginning and remind myself, it's just stay true to that. Don't worry about what other people are doing. It really doesn't matter. If you're building right and you're building slow, it will serve you well because your heart's in it and you're doing it for the right reasons. So it's easy to get very lost in any journey, isn't it? So I'd just say,
same. You obviously touched on it. Stay within your lane. Really.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't worry about distractions.
Yeah.
If you're doing the right thing for the right reasons, it'll all come good.
And to last point, if as a young professional athlete in any sport or any young entrepreneur starting out, what would you want to tell them for a little piece of advice?
Have people around you that genuinely were there before and will be there long after you are a footballer, an athlete, a cricketer, a golfer, whatever that looks like. And it's okay. Ask the questions, ask people, I don't understand that. Don't be too proud, because that's where I've seen people become vulnerable. We ourselves were vulnerable because we thought we should know. We thought that with money we should have those answers, and we didn't, and people took advantage of us. So I would just say, build a trusted team. As much as you can, trust them, and ask the questions. It's your life. It's your plan. Just make sure you know what you're doing.
I think as well, on the last touching point, I think pride is a very sacred thing as well, isn't it? And sometimes when you have a lot of pride, you sometimes need to think you know everything. And I think to understand that, like you said, ask the questions, because if you don't answer them and you get caught out, you're going to look like the fool at the end of the day. And no question's a silly question, is it?
More money, more problems, more expensive problems, I should say. So that's what you're stepping into, not only this comfortability, but equally there is a level of responsibility. You should know, and you should try and ask, or ask somebody that you can whisper to and say, can you help me?
Or reach out to you.
yeah, maybe.
That's been super insight. I mean, especially resonating with my career. And I think the biggest thing is planning, and it's starting now, not later.
Yeah.
So I've taken a lot from this conversation, and it's something I wish I did when I was young, when I just started. But I guess people don't really, it's not really, I guess, advertised to go talk to an advisor, or go talk to a psychologist, or go talk to whatever it might be. And I think it should resonate with a lot of young individuals, not even just athletes, just anyone really who's in university or starting a career or whatever it might be. The earlier you plan, the better. I think a lot of us try to just kick the tin down the road and go, I'll do it next year.
It's not that fun sometimes, is it, making a plan for things? Yeah. You'd want to be impulsive. We're a generation of impulse and Amazon, so it kind of goes against the fibers. But I have just found, like, the busier life gets and the bigger the ambition, if there isn't something backing it, you are walking into darkness. It gets really messy, so you do need a plan.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you very much. Massively appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emmelia. Bye.